Story 1, Susan and Carter. Susan Wilkes enjoyed the simplicity of babysitting. For years, it had been her go-to job while juggling college courses. Her reputation on the app was stellar, dozens of glowing reviews from grateful parents who praised her patience and skill with kids. She had her quirks. Sure, Susan wasn't the strict babysitter, but she knew how to maintain order without turning a home into a war zone. When the Harrisons reached out for a week-long gig, Susan hesitated. Watching a 10-year-old for 5 straight days sounded exhausting. Kids Carter's age were often difficult, half child, half teenager. But the paycheck they offered was substantial. And her online classes allowed flexibility. "We'll be back Friday evening," Mrs. Harrison had said during their Zoom interview. "Carter mostly keeps to himself. You won't even know he's there," Mr. Harrison added with a chuckle. "Just don't try to clean his room. It's his kingdom. And we've learned to pick our battles." When Susan arrived Monday morning, the house was a pristine suburban dream: white picket fence, neatly trimmed hedges, and a 2-car garage. Inside, the aroma of fresh coffee and cinnamon welcomed her. Mrs. Harrison gave a whirlwind tour, highlighting Carter's favorite meals and reiterating that she didn't need to enforce strict rules. Carter sat on the couch, controller in hand, barely glancing up. "Hi," he muttered before returning to his game. His parents exchanged awkward smiles. The first day passed uneventfully. Carter was indeed low maintenance, spending hours immersed in his game. Susan felt almost guilty for how easy the job seemed. She cooked mac and cheese, tidied the kitchen, and studied at the dining table while Carter ignored her. By Tuesday, the cracks began to show. Carter ran through the house, screaming and mimicking car engines. When Susan told him to stop, he shot her a glare that made her skin crawl. "You're not my mom," he snapped, his voice dripping with venom. "I don't have to listen to you." Susan bit her tongue, unwilling to escalate the situation. She hoped his behavior was a one-off. It wasn't. By Wednesday, the defiance turned into something darker. Carter played his video games at full volume late into the night. When Susan knocked on his door, asking him to turn it down, he shouted, "Make me." The next morning, Susan woke to find him at the breakfast table, staring at her. "What?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "You're boring," he said flatly before stomping back to his room. Thursday started like the others, Carter glued to his screen, Susan cleaning around him. Around mid-afternoon, she noticed the smell. Carter reeked of sweat and unwashed clothes. "Carter, you need to shower," Susan said, pinching her nose. "No, Carter," she insisted, trying to sound firm. "You smell terrible. Shower. Now." It took nearly an hour of arguing before he relented, muttering curses under his breath. While the shower ran, Susan finally had a moment to breathe. She wandered into his room, intent on tidying up the disaster zone he called home. The chaos was overwhelming. Food wrappers, discarded toys, and dirty clothes were scattered everywhere. As she picked up a soda can, something caught her eye, a handmade booklet tucked under his pillow. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pulled it out. The cover, scrawled in crude handwriting, read, "All the ways I want to kill Susan." Her stomach dropped. She hesitated, then opened it. The first page was relatively tame, a stick figure labeled "Susan" being punched by a larger stick figure. But as she turned the pages, the drawings grew more grotesque. One depicted a stick figure Susan with her head severed, blood pouring from her neck. Another showed her tied to a chair, surrounded by flames. The captions were equally horrifying: "She deserves this for being so ugly." Susan's hands trembled as she flipped through the booklet. The last page was the most chilling. It showed a stick figure, lying in bed with a knife sticking out of its chest. The caption read, "Friday." "What the hell?" Susan whispered, snapping photos of each page with her phone. A loud click behind her made her jump. "What are you doing in my room?" Carter's voice was icy. Susan spun around, clutching the booklet. Carter stood in the doorway, his face devoid of the petulance she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, there was something far more unnerving: cold, calculated hatred. I was cleaning," Susan stammered. Carter's eyes flicked to the booklet in her hand. "Put that down," he said, his voice eerily calm. Susan stepped back. "Carter, this isn't normal. I need to talk to your parents." "They won't believe you," he interrupted, smirking. Suddenly, Carter lunged. Susan dodged, dropping the booklet as she scrambled out of the room. Carter grabbed something from his desk, a small pocket knife, and followed her. "You think you can just snoop through my stuff?" he yelled, his voice breaking with rage. "I hate you." Susan slammed the door to his room, pressing her weight against it. The first stab came almost instantly. The blade pierced the wood, inches from her face. "Carter, stop this right now," she screamed, fumbling for her phone. "No," he shouted, stabbing again. "I'm going to kill you." Susan dialed his parents, her fingers shaking. When they answered, she barely managed to choke out the words. "Your son, he's trying to kill me." The Harrisons were skeptical at first. "Carter's a difficult kid," Mrs. Harrison said. "But he wouldn't." "Check your messages," Susan interrupted, sending them the photos of the notebook. Minutes later, Mr. Harrison called back, his voice strained. "We're on our way. Please, just keep him calm." "I'm not staying here," Susan said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm leaving." The Harrisons begged her to wait, but Susan packed her things and fled the house, her heart pounding. Susan never babysat again. The experience left her shaken, and she avoided the Harrisons' neighborhood at all costs. Months later, she stumbled across an article about child psychopathology. The descriptions mirrored Carter's behavior: lack of empathy, manipulative tendencies, and violent fantasies. She often wondered what became of him. Would he grow out of his darkness? Or would he escalate? The thought kept her awake at night. Susan's story is a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking beneath the surface. Could Carter have been stopped? Or was he born to bring fear? Share your thoughts below. And remember, sometimes it's the seemingly ordinary that hides the most terrifying truths. Story 2, Daniel and Arthur. Grief is a cruel companion. It clings to you, whispers in your ear, and weaves itself into the fabric of your life. For Maria, a young widow, the loss of her husband Marcus was an unbearable weight. Seeking solace for herself and her 6-year-old son Daniel, she moved to a quiet neighborhood. She hoped the change would heal them, give them a chance to breathe again. But when Daniel began waving at someone outside their window, a person Maria couldn't see, she brushed it off as an imaginary friend. Arthur. Daniel called him. It seemed innocent enough. Even endearing. Children cope in strange ways, she thought. Then came the drawings. Pale figures with hollow eyes and eerie red dots on their foreheads. Daniel's whispers at night turned into giggles in the darkness. His cheerful demeanor gave way to moments of unsettling silence. And then came the revelation that sent chills down Maria's spine: Arthur wasn't just imaginary. Daniel claimed to have met him, standing beside his father's grave. If you discovered your child's imaginary friend wasn't so imaginary, how would you react? Would you fight the darkness? Or would you run? The house was modest but cozy. Nestled on a tree-lined street where every home looked like it had been plucked from a storybook. Maria had chosen it deliberately. After Marcus's death, their old home felt suffocating, a place where every corner whispered his absence. Here, in this fresh space, she hoped to rebuild. Daniel adjusted quickly, which brought Maria relief. He waved to neighbors, raced his toy cars across the living room floor, and seemed genuinely excited about starting at his new school. It was a spark of hope Maria hadn't felt in months. One afternoon, she caught him by the large living room window, his tiny hand waving enthusiastically. Smiling, Maria joined him. "Who are you waving to, sweetie?" she asked. "A friend," he replied, not turning away. Maria looked outside. The street was empty. "What's your friend's name?" "Arthur," Daniel said, grinning. Maria chuckled. "Arthur. Huh. Maybe he'll come over for dinner one day." She ruffled his hair and thought nothing of it. Within a week, Daniel's mentions of Arthur became more frequent. He talked about Arthur while eating cereal, during bath time, and even as Maria tucked him in at night. "Arthur likes the night, Mommy," Daniel murmured one evening, his gaze fixed on the window. Maria paused, her hand hovering over the light switch. "Why does Arthur like the night?" "Because it's quiet," Daniel said simply, as if that explained everything. Maria chalked it up to childhood imagination. But then came the nights when she would wake up to find Daniel standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice tight with unease. "What are you doing?" "Arthur's out there," he replied without looking at her. "He wants to come in." Maria's stomach twisted. She pulled him away, closing the curtains with more force than necessary. "It's bedtime. No more Arthur tonight. Okay?" Daniel didn't argue. But his expression lingered in her mind, a strange mixture of calm and something else. It was a Saturday morning when Maria discovered the first drawing. She was tidying Daniel's room when she saw a crumpled piece of paper beneath his bed. Unfolding it, she found herself staring at a crude yet chilling depiction. A tall, thin figure stood in the center of the page. Its eyes were hollow ovals, and its skin was a pale gray. But what unnerved Maria most was the dark red dot in the middle of its forehead. Around the figure, jagged black lines seemed to radiate outward, like a shattered mirror. "What is this?" Maria asked when Daniel came home. He glanced at the drawing and shrugged. "It's Arthur." Maria tried to keep her voice steady. "Why does Arthur have a red dot on his forehead?" "Because he has a hole there," Daniel said matter-of-factly. "Arthur said a bad man shot him." The room seemed to grow colder. Maria swallowed hard. "Where did you meet Arthur?" "Daniel?" "At Daddy's funeral," Daniel replied, his voice soft. "He was standing by Daddy's grave." He said he knew what it felt like to be lonely. Maria clutched the drawing tighter, her mind racing. Maria couldn't ignore it any longer. Arthur wasn't just a figment of Daniel's imagination, at least not in the way she wanted to believe. She began searching for answers, diving into forums and books about imaginary friends, child psychology, and even the supernatural. But nothing could explain the mounting oddities. Daniel began speaking to Arthur more openly, often laughing as if sharing private jokes. He drew more pictures, each one more disturbing than the last. In one, Arthur stood in their living room, staring out the window. In another, he loomed over Daniel's bed, his hollow eyes unblinking. Maria felt trapped. She didn't want to scare her son, but the sense of dread grew with each passing day. One night, she found herself standing by the window where Daniel so often waved. Pulling back the curtain, she whispered into the void, "Who are you?" The silence felt deafening. It was a quiet Sunday night when everything came to a head. Maria had just finished reading Daniel a bedtime story and was about to leave his room when he stopped her. "Mommy?" "Yes. Sweetie?" "Arthur isn't shy anymore," Daniel said, his voice unusually calm. "He wants to come in." Maria froze. "What do you mean?" "He's been waiting," Daniel said, sitting up in bed. "But now he says it's okay. We don't have to be scared." Maria's chest tightened. The air felt thick, oppressive. "We're leaving," she said abruptly, grabbing Daniel and pulling him out of bed. "But Arthur." "Arthur's not real," she snapped, her voice breaking. "He's not real, Daniel." As she rushed to pack a bag, the lights flickered. A shadow passed over the living room window. Maria didn't stop to look. She drove to her parents' house, her hands shaking the entire way. Maria's parents were devoutly religious. Her mother insisted they see their church's bishop immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel and Maria underwent a series of prayers and cleansing rituals. Holy water was sprinkled throughout their home. Candles burned night and day. Gradually, the shadows seemed to recede. Daniel stopped mentioning Arthur. The drawings ceased. For the first time in months, Maria began to feel safe. Exactly 1 year later, Maria returned to Marcus's grave, bringing flowers as she often did. Daniel, now more vibrant and carefree, played nearby. As Maria knelt by the headstone, she noticed a new grave beside it. The headstone was simple, unassuming. Arthur Miller, an ideal son and a loving husband, gone too soon. Maria's breath caught. Beneath the inscription was a small indent in the stone, a circular scar, just above where the heart would be. Her hands trembled as Daniel called out, "Mommy, look!" He pointed to the trees. Maria saw nothing, but a familiar chill crept over her. She heard Daniel's voice echo in her mind, "He wants to come in." Would you have done anything differently if you were Maria? Could Arthur have been helped? Or was he something beyond human understanding? Share your thoughts below. Story 3, Joey and the Bandana Man. Children have an incredible way of making sense of the world, filling the gaps of reality with the magic of imagination. For Joey, a bright and creative 6-year-old, drawing was his favorite way to explore his thoughts. Most of the time, he sketched his family, his mom, dad, and older sibling, capturing their faces in bright, cheerful colors. But one day, Joey introduced a new subject into his artwork, a tall man with a red bandana covering his face. When his older sibling asked who it was, Joey replied casually, "That's the Bandana Man. He plays with me at night." At first, it seemed like a harmless fabrication, the kind kids often invent. But as the days passed, Joey's stories about the Bandana Man grew more detailed and unsettling. One night, Joey knocked on his sibling's door with a chilling request: "The Bandana Man wants to play with you." What would you do if your child's imaginary friend wasn't imaginary? Would you dismiss it as fantasy? Or would you believe in the impossible? Keep reading to discover how this family's innocent bedtime story became their worst nightmare. Joey's creativity was boundless. He spent hours sprawled on the floor with crayons and paper, creating vibrant pictures that filled the refrigerator door. His family loved his cheerful artwork, especially his older sibling, who often joined him to admire his work. One afternoon, while Joey was busy drawing, his sibling noticed a new addition to his usual portraits. There were the familiar sketches of their parents and Joey himself. But beside them was an unfamiliar figure, a tall man with a red bandana covering the lower half of his face. "Who's that, Joey?" they asked, pointing to the mysterious figure. Joey didn't look up. "The Bandana Man," he replied simply, as if the answer was obvious. "Is he your imaginary friend?" Joey shook his head. "No, he's real. He wears the bandana so he doesn't get sick. We play games at night." The explanation made sense in a childlike way. It was a time when masks were common, and Joey's imagination likely borrowed from what he saw around him. Still, something about the figure felt off. The Bandana Man's eyes, drawn as two dark slashes, seemed to stare out of the page with an unsettling intensity. The family tried to brush off Joey's new friend as another whimsical invention. But the Bandana Man seemed to take root in Joey's world, showing up in more drawings and bedtime conversations. "Did you play with the Bandana Man today?" their mom asked one evening, half joking. "Yeah," Joey replied, his tone eerily serious. "He asked me about you and Daddy." That gave her pause. "What did he want to know?" "He asked what time you come home. I told him you're late a lot." Joey giggled, as if sharing a harmless secret. Over the next few days, Joey's sibling noticed other strange behavior. Joey started leaving his window slightly open at night, claiming the Bandana Man liked the breeze. He also became secretive, hiding his drawings or brushing off questions about his friend. One night, Joey's sibling decided to investigate. While Joey slept, they crept into his room and flipped through his sketchbook. The latest drawing chilled them, the Bandana Man standing beside Joey's bed, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. It was a quiet Saturday night when the situation took a terrifying turn. Their parents had gone to a dinner party, leaving Joey and his sibling alone. By 9 p.m., Joey was in bed, and his sibling stayed up scrolling through their phone. Around 11 p.m., there was a soft knock on their door. "Come in," they called absent-mindedly. The door creaked open, and Joey peeked his head inside. "The Bandana Man wants to play with you," he said softly. A chill ran down their spine. "Joey, it's late. Go back to bed." But before they could say more, Joey stepped aside, and a tall figure emerged from the shadows. The man was exactly as Joey had drawn him, thin, with a red bandana covering the lower half of his face. His dark eyes glinted in the dim light. "He doesn't want to play with me tonight," Joey said, his voice oddly calm. "Just you." The sibling froze. Unable to process what they were seeing, the Bandana Man stepped closer, his heavy breaths audible beneath the bandana. He moved with a predator's patience, each step deliberate. The siblings' paralysis broke as the Bandana Man lunged. They screamed, scrambling to escape. But the man grabbed them, pinning them to the bed. His strength was overwhelming, and his breath reeked of sweat and alcohol. Joey stood by the door, watching silently. "Joey! Run!" his sibling shouted. But the boy didn't move. The Bandana Man pulled the bandana from his face, revealing a thin, twisted smile. Before the sibling could react, he stuffed the fabric into their mouth and secured it with his belt. The weight of the man pressed down on them as he reached for their wrists. Panic surged through their body. But the sound of a car pulling into the driveway froze the Bandana Man mid-motion. The front door opened, and their father's voice called out, "We're home." The Bandana Man cursed under his breath, releasing his grip and bolting for Joey's window. In seconds, he was gone, leaving the sibling trembling and gasping for air. The parents rushed to their children's rooms, alarmed by the commotion. When the sibling told them what had happened, their father immediately called the police. Officers arrived within minutes, combing through the house and questioning Joey. Joey's innocent explanations were heartbreaking. He had met the Bandana Man on his way home from school. The man had been friendly, asking Joey questions about his family and promising to play games with him at night. The Bandana Man had used Joey's trust to learn their routines, finding the perfect time to strike. Though the Bandana Man was never caught, the family took every precaution to ensure their safety. New locks were installed, windows were sealed, and Joey was never left unsupervised. But for the sibling, the scars ran deeper. Nightmares plagued their sleep, and the sound of soft knocking filled them with dread. Joey, too young to grasp the full extent of the danger, continued to draw the Bandana Man as if he were a distant memory. Would you have dismissed Joey's imaginary friend as harmless fantasy? Or would you have taken his words seriously from the start? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes the monsters children see aren't imaginary. As our stories draw to a close, one question lingers like a faint whisper in the dark: how well do we truly know the world of children? What they see, what they imagine, are these innocent flights of fancy, or glimpses into something far more sinister? Think back to Susan and Carter. What happens to a boy like Carter as he grows older? Do those violent impulses fade? Or do they transform into something even darker? Then there's Daniel and Arthur. Was Arthur truly a lost soul looking for solace? Or something far more malevolent, waiting for the right moment to cross the threshold? And finally, Joey and the Bandana Man. It's chilling to think how easily trust can be manipulated. What if the Bandana Man hadn't been interrupted that night? These tales remind us that the ordinary can mask the extraordinary. And sometimes, the scariest monsters are those we never suspect. Before you turn off the lights tonight, take a moment to reflect. Is your window securely locked? Did you hear that faint sound outside? Perhaps a child's giggle? Here at Wolf Tells, we thrive on exploring the mysteries that lurk just beyond the veil. If these stories send a shiver down your spine, then you're in the right place. Help us continue to bring you the most bone-chilling tales by liking this video, sharing it with your fellow thrill seekers, and subscribing to our channel. Your support keeps the shadows alive and ensures we can keep diving into the darkness. And don't go too far, our next video explores a series of paranormal encounters so terrifying They've been sealed away from public records. Curious? Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. This is Wolf Tells. Signing off. Sleep well, if you can.